The one issue the government leaders were in furious agreement on was family violence. A constant problem for women who've fled interstate to escape physical abuse is that domestic violence orders they've taken out against perpetrators haven't been legally recognised in other jurisdictions. Today's meeting has agreed to extinguish that problem and have a national scheme in place by the end of next year. Senator Michaelia Cash is the Minister assisting the Prime Minister for Women. I spoke with her earlier. Michaelia Cash, thank you very much for talking to 7:30.
Great to be with you, Sabra.
Now, the Prime Minister's announced a $30 million domestic violence campaign. Why is such a campaign necessary?
Sabra, when you look at the statistics, 1 in 3 women in Australia above the age of 15 will experience domestic or family violence in their lifetime. 1 woman each week in Australia is murdered as a result of domestic or family violence. Clearly, the message that domestic violence is wrong, domestic violence should not be tolerated, and domestic violence must be stopped is not resonating with our society. We therefore believe that a national awareness campaign is appropriate.
But for those who think domestic violence is not a crime, how is a campaign likely to change their minds?
It's making them aware that there are consequences for their actions. Assault in Australia, Sabra, should be assault. The mere fact that you place domestic or family in front of it shouldn't mitigate it in any way. Murder is murder.
But also isn't something wrong here in that most victims don't come forward to police? They feel too scared to report the crime?
Sabra, in days gone past, I would agree with you. But I have to say, over the last 18 months in particular, we have seen quite literally a tsunami of a momentum in relation to bringing this issue out from behind closed doors. I think across Australia there is an awakening that domestic violence is wrong, that enough is enough. And in 2015, we now have an unprecedented opportunity to finally come together as a Commonwealth government, as state and territory governments, and as a society, and actually make a difference.
COAG has agreed today to have a national domestic violence order scheme in place, which will mean that such orders are recognised in any state or territory, that they'll be recognised across borders. When, realistically, will that be in place?
Well, certainly the communique indicates that we would like to see the legal framework for that recognition of domestic violence orders in place by the end of 2015.
The legal framework may be in place, but again, the practicalities, when will the system actually be up and working?
Well, in relation to the system, we announced today that the trial between the 3 states is currently underway. We provided $3.3 million to Crimtrac. It's one thing to have the legal framework in place because obviously we need the legal basis to be able to recognise the DVO. We're also working, and we will have a report back to COAG by the end of 2015 as to how the trial is going in relation to the actual ability for states in real time to access another state's information on DVOs. Again, this is a massive step forward for domestic violence victims.
It is a major step forward, as you say, but the practicalities, when will, for example, a person in Western Australia, if they decide to move to Queensland and have domestic violence orders recognised practically in both those states, when will that actually happen?
Sabra, it is an action item under the second action plan of the National Action Plan to Reduce Violence Against Women and Children. The time frame for the second action plan and the action items therein is 2013 to 2016. So I would well and truly hope that with the legal framework being in place by 2015, the trial being completed by the end of 2015, moving into 2016, we will see the recognition of DVOs across state jurisdictions.
COAG will also look at ways to deal with increased use of technology in committing abuse against women to ensure that they have legal protections here. I think the sorts of things that you're talking about is the use of social media and pictures, explicit pictures to blackmail women. I think it's called as revenge porn.
Revenge porn.
Yeah. What options will you explore?
Very much looking at whether or not the legal framework is in place to hold perpetrators to account. Very much upskilling.
It hasn't really kept pace, has it, with technology?
No, and that's no criticism of anybody, Sabra. Technology moves at a very, very fast pace. This is a new and emerging issue. It's also understanding how that technology can be harnessed and then used as evidence in any court proceedings. So again, it's new, it's emerging, and COAG has the opportunity, a unique opportunity, to be at the forefront of putting in place national standards to deal with technology abuse.
New Zealand here is examining changing its Privacy Act here to look at implementing fines of up to, or compensation arrangements of up to $200,000 for victims of such crimes here. Is that something that the federal government would consider?
Well, certainly, we have obviously announced an advisory panel chaired by Ken Lay, the former Commissioner of the Victorian Police, ably assisted by our Australian of the Year, Rosie Batty, with members also to be announced over the next few weeks from state and territories. That is something that they will be providing advice to COAG on. Sabra, when it comes to domestic violence, when it comes to looking at ways to tackle the issue, I'm not close to anything, Sabra. I'm not close to anything. I'm passionate about this issue. The government's passionate about this issue. You know, looking at the state and territory premiers and chief ministers today at the press conference, the one issue they were in furious agreement in relation to was tackling domestic violence. Going forward, that's an outstanding thing, not just for government, but for all Australians.
The one issue clearly that they weren't in furious agreement on was the GST distribution. Premier Barnett, clearly an unhappy camper there. You're a West Australian. Can there ever be a resolution on this as long as the Prime Minister is insisting on a unanimous agreement here that's fair to everyone?
Look, Sabra, when you look at what came out of COAG today and what was reached in the communique, the issue, it's a complex issue. It has been referred to the Federation White Paper for discussion on what we can actually do to ensure fairness going forward. I was very pleased when I was listening to the press conference to myself to hear the Prime Minister put on the table that one of the options available that will be discussed is putting a floor in the amount of GST that a particular state or territory can get back.
But there needs to be a unanimous and fair agreement on this as well,
and that's
can there,
why,
given that
I
explicit...
think there was very goodwill shown by all the state and territory premiers today. Colin Barnett, rightly upset. I don't think that any state or territory premier or chief minister who was faced with the same situation as we are faced with in Western Australia, which is decreasing royalties because of the falling iron ore price, which is going from 37 cents down to less than 30 cents in terms of our GST return, would argue anything other than what Premier Barnett has done.
A unanimous agreement, is that mission impossible?
Oh, I never say anything's impossible in this game, Sabra. If I did, you'd write things off. But certainly, again, I think we had some positive steps taken today in relation to the GST, but in particular, the bilateral discussions that are going to be had between the Prime Minister and Premier Barnett are a positive sign for Western Australia going forward.
Minister, thanks for your time tonight.
Pleasure to be with you, Sabra.